Hello class, it's nice meeting you all today. Before we start our discussion, let's have a prayer first. May I request somebody in the class to lead the prayer? Okay, Mr. Palagchosa, may lead the prayer. Thank you, Mr. Palagchosa. Okay, by the way, my name is Andrew C. Salonga, your teacher in economics. You can call me Teacher Drew. So before we start our discussion, let us have first check our attendance. Is anybody in the class absent? Can you check your seatmate if he or she is absent? Nobody? Okay, that's good to hear that nobody in the class is absent. And so, before we move on to our discussion, let us first review our topic yesterday. Can somebody in the class tell me what is our topic yesterday? Yes, Mr. Consolacion? The law of demand and supply. You got it right. Okay, thank you, Mr. Consolacion. Moving on. Our topic for today is all about budget deficit and surplus. But before we move on to that, let us have first our objectives of the discussion for today. First, in our objectives is discuss the components of budget. Second is analyze the causes and effects of budget deficit and surplus. Third is illustrate the differences between budget deficit and surplus. Our outline of the study or our discussion for today is first is the components of budget, second is the causes and effect of budget deficit and surplus, third is the differences between budget deficit and surplus, and lastly, the assessment. Okay, let's proceed. Before we go to what is budget deficit and surplus, let us first define what is budget. Is anybody in the class has the idea or opinion about what is budget? Okay, Mr. Luchin? Correct. Thank you for your participation. Okay, a budget is just a document that itemizes anticipated income and expenses during a period of time and is often used for planning and it helps you determine what you probably will earn, what you must spend, and what will you do with the money left over. Did everyone follow? Yes? Okay, that's great. Okay, before I continue, if you have questions, you may ask after I've done my discussion. Okay, let's proceed. Components of budget. There are two components of budget. First is the budget revenue, and second is the budget capital. Budget revenue, it deals with the revenue aspect of the government budget. It explains how revenue is generated or collected by the government and how it is allocated among various expenditure heads. Along with it is revenue receipts and revenue expenditure. Second is the budget capital. Budget capital, it deals with the capital aspect of the government. It consists of capital receipts and capital expenditure. Next is the types of budget. There are three types of budget, namely the balanced budget, surplus budget, and deficit budget. First is the balanced budget. Balanced budget in government, budget is said to be balanced budget if estimated government receipts are equal to the estimated government expenditure. We can see it here in my presentation that expenditures and revenue is equal. Second is the budget surplus. Okay, may I request somebody to read? Anybody else? Yes, thank you. Okay, thank you for reading. Okay, what is budget surplus? In economics term, it is fiscal surplus. This is an amount of a resources or asset that exceeds the utilized portion. It's commonly used in the description of excess assets such as capital, income, profits, and goods occurs when there is a disequilibrium between demand and supply. A disequilibrium astorts the product flow in the market. To ease this, the government may set a price floor, which is the minimum price under which product or services should be sold. In budget, a surplus occurs when income exceeds the expenses. Budget deficit. This is a situation where the required resources, especially money, is less than what is required. Hence, expenses exceeds revenue in a budget. The flow of money falls short of the outflow, which can be a result of overspending. Budget deficit, we often experience this in our country. We take, for example, the pandemic, that what is happening today. Before this pandemic strike us, we have a healthy economy. While during the pandemic, we are so shocked that our government cannot sustain the needs of our COVID patients. Because of this, our emergency funds is not enough to sustain the needs of our patients. Especially we have the lack of materials in hospitals, the facilities also, and so the nurses and the doctors. We need the face mask, the vaccines, and everything. And the only solution for this is to borrow money from other country. That's why when we experience budget deficit, we tend to borrow a money to other country. Okay, let's proceed to the causes of budget deficit and surplus. First is the cause of budget deficit. There are three causes I've listed here, major causes. First is the absence of emergency fund, just like what I have explained earlier, that our country is not enough of emergency funds that we need when we experience this phenomenon or this pandemic. Second is politics, and third is the low revenues. Politics, because I am not explaining this to aware you that our politicians are corrupt, but somehow there are some of the politics are corrupt. They tend to have those money for some budgets that allocated to a project just for their future campaign. And let's proceed to effect of budget deficit. First is the limited access to investors. Second is increased debt. Third is low rate of economic development. Increase in debt, of course, because we borrowed money from other country. Low rate of economic development. This must not be a huge impact, but it can lower the rate of our economic. Okay, class, do you still follow? Okay, let's proceed to cause of budget surplus. The cause of budget surplus is when growth in revenue exceeds growth in expenditure, or following the reduction in cost or spending, or both. Second is increase in taxes. Of course, with government increased taxes, they would have, for example, an extra money to lend to have a project. For example, they would have an assistance for those PWD and etc. If they would have in a project for the near future, so they can use those money. Then the effect of budget surplus, impact to growth, declining government debt, and deflation. Of course, surplus budget is not always good for our country. This would result to deflation also. Okay, next is the difference between budget deficit and surplus. Can somebody read the differences of budget deficit and surplus? Yes. Thank you. Okay, I'll just give you two examples of the differences between budget deficit and surplus. In government expenditure, surplus, government expenditure is high, and in deficit, government expenditure is lower. Effects on tax. In budget surplus, tax reduction may occur, and in budget deficit, taxes may be increased in budget deficit. And so the similarities of budget deficit and surplus, they both affect the economy. And next are key takeaways. These are our terminologies for what we have discussed. And then next, the conclusion. We've learned that when a government expenditures on goods, services, or transfer payments exceeds their tax revenue, the government has run a budget deficit. Governments borrow money to pay for budget deficits, and whenever a government borrows money, this adds to its national debt. While both surplus and deficit affect the economy by either causing an equilibrium or disequilibrium. A surplus is an amount of a resources or asset that exceeds the utilized portion, while a deficit is a situation whereby a required resources, especially money, is less than what is required. Hence, expenses exceeds revenue. To attain favorable economic conditions, both surplus and deficit should be at equilibrium. Okay, guys, do you have questions? If you have questions, do not hesitate to ask me. Okay, everybody understands? Thank you. Okay, let's proceed to our assessment. Our assessment has, for today, composed of 5 questions. You may answer it in your 1/2 sheet of paper. You must answer it briefly and concise with 2 to 3 sentences. I'll give you 10 minutes to answer your assessment. Okay, thank you guys for answering your assessment. You may pass it in front. Okay, class, before you dismiss, you may take this assignment. Take note for this assignment. In your 1/2 sheet of paper, give an idea of what is the representation of the graph. So I'm gonna flash it on screen. You can see it. 3 to 5 sentences only. And then, please study for our next topic tomorrow about absolute and comparative advantages. I hope you will research for this and able to have an idea for our topic next session. Okay, class, thank you for listening. You may now dismiss. Thank you. Goodbye, class.